Thanks very much, Ian. I just want to preface my remarks by saying that even if nuclear weapons were free, we wouldn't want them. Yes. And even if we were flush with money as a country, which actually I think we are, it's a question of priorities, we wouldn't want them or war either, so it's in that context. But what we have seen over the last few years is that although the government ratchets up the rhetoric around we don't have money for things, when it comes to the question of war and weapons, we absolutely do. We've seen that with the escalating bill around Iraq and Afghanistan, billions now, tens of billions on that. We saw when the government wanted to have its intervention in Libya, suddenly, yes, okay, we'll pay £1 million per missile for the attacks there. And of course, pretty shockingly recently, we've seen David Cameron say, okay, yeah, well, we've got £50 million to spend on glorifying the First World War. You know, so that's a measure of the priorities of the government. When it comes to nuclear weapons, of course, the bill is astronomical. The current system, the TRIDENT nuclear weapon system, we spend around about £3 billion a year just on the normal running costs. If you equate that into what you could spend it on, many things obviously, but one thing, £3 billion a year, that would provide 30,000 houses and create 60,000 construction jobs. You know, that's the kind of alternatives you could be looking at. The big challenge for us at the moment as an anti-nuclear movement, but it's also a challenge for the whole country, is that the government is planning to spend in excess of £100 billion on replacing the current nuclear weapon system. So that's what we're fighting currently. There's going to be a vote in Parliament on that in 2016, and there's going to be a big debate around the general election, the run-up to the general election, on whether or not we as a country should have nuclear weapons. I think one of the things that's most interesting is that the government, and indeed the leadership of the Labour Party currently, is saying we need to replace TRIDENT, we need to spend that money. But the same government that's arguing that, also in its national security strategy, the new assessment they had when they came into government, they actually looked at the threats that Britain faces, and they said, it's climate change, it's terrorism, it's pandemics, it's organised crime, it's cyber warfare, you know, all these things which genuinely are threats to a greater or lesser extent. And they actually downgraded state-on-state nuclear threat to a tier 2 threat, so-called, and said we face no likely threat. So they downgraded it, but simultaneously said we need to spend over £100 billion on replacing this thing that was devised for the Cold War. You know, completely contradictory and crazy. And if you think that maybe we do need it, you know, we may face a threat in the future and that kind of thing, let me quote from a number of generals, senior military figures, who say TRIDENT is militarily useless and irrelevant and it should be scrapped. You've got the former Tory Defence Secretary Michael Portillo, who defended it in the Cold War, who now says it's completely irrelevant, past its sell-by date and should be scrapped. You know? So all these expert opinions, so-called, all these military and defence experts saying we don't need it, we should get rid of it, the government downgrading it, but still this desire to spend over £100 billion on replacing it. Completely contradictory and mad, and that's what we as a movement have to draw out over the next period, the 18 months up to the general election, and then the additional period to the vote in Parliament. Fortunately, the TUC has seen sense on this. You know, many of the unions have fantastic policies, affiliated to CND, but now the TUC as a whole, at its recent Congress, passed a resolution saying that TRIDENT should be scrapped. So the trade union movement is on side. The next thing we have to do really is to bring about a change in Labour Party policy. It's quite interesting that in the recent National Policy Forum process inside the Labour Party, there was a lot of disquiet about the party's position on replacing TRIDENT. Lots of people moving there for a change, but the leadership still quite resistant to that change. And many people say that there are two reasons for that. It's not that they think it's militarily useful and is necessary for our defence. One is they don't want to look soft on defence. defence when it comes into the election, and two is that they think it will be a vote loser somehow. I've been in debates with Labour representatives at CLP meetings and so on, and they say, well, actually, we don't think we should have Trident either, but look, we lost the general election in 1982 because of that, so we're not going to oppose it. You know, completely unprincipled, but also out of touch with the reality of today. Because the reality is, opinion polls over the last 5 or 6 years have all shown a majority of the population not only opposed to replacing Trident, but in favour of scrapping it. You know, so the Labour Party leadership has to understand we don't need it militarily, it's an anachronistic system from the Cold War, and the majority of people don't want it, and we would rather spend the money on something else. So that is the reality, and that is the challenge we as a movement face in the next couple of years. We need to ensure that the People's Assembly takes this on fully, and we need to go forward and defeat Trident. Thank you.